Welcome to our first session for Principles of Software Engineering. This is Malik Harbawi, your instructor, and today we will discuss the first part of Chapter 4, Requirements Engineering. This is part 1, as I mentioned. Let's see the topics that we will be covering: software requirements, functional and non-functional requirements, requirements in precision. So, what's the requirement or requirements engineering? How can we define it and what it means in software development or software industry? So, in brief or in a basic sense, we need to establish services required or needed by the customer. And in order for us to establish these services required by the customer, we need a process. This process represents the requirements engineering. However, it's not just plain as that. We need to think about the constraints available on the system, how the system operates, and what kind of services it provides. So services and the constraints on the system. So this is the idea. We need to think about what kind of description of software system that we're having or we are discussing or we are meant to deliver to the user, plus the constraints under which the software or the system will be operated and also developed. Well, so in essentially these requirements or the system requirements are actually description of the services and constraints. And we may come up with a document which will be actually your first task for the project. We call it requirements document. And this document usually comes in specific format based on some certain standard. And we will discuss it later on. This is in brief the requirements engineering and the process of how we determine the services, or actually we lay out or detail the services that the customer require from the system, what the system should produce, and the constraints under which the system will operate and develop. So a requirement by itself, not requirements engineering, a requirement by itself, how can we define it? It may be categorized or can be categorized. It can be categorized or it can be actually viewed from two different perspectives. The first one is a high-level perspective or an abstract actually perspective. What does it mean? It means just a plain or a straightforward explanation or a statement about the system or the constraints of what the system should do. How even the system should produce an output or a functional or functionality or a service. We usually say high level or an abstract. What do we mean? An essential explanation, an essential you can say statement, plain statement. We need a software to do this and this. We need a software for distance education. We need a software to count people somewhere. We need a software for X and Y. So that's a plain high-level abstract statement. However, if we go in deep and we detail some specification, then it's also a requirement, but we may go too specific, too detailed, and that's also a requirement, as I mentioned. Now you may ask me, why do we need to go to two different categories of description or requirements? Why do we need to have extreme abstract and extreme detailed? Well, we have a valid reason to do so. The first one is we may need this kind of description as a bid for a contract. So there will be different companies bidding for a contract to get it. And in that case, they will just provide a plain, you can say, view of their own about the project. They don't have to detail everything. They don't have to provide everything at that time. Once they gain the contract, whoever gains the contract or gains the bid, then, well, they have to detail everything so that the customer or the client either accepts, approves, or asks for amendment or a change before going ahead and starting the project. So basically, both definitions of requirements are needed, and they are basically available in software engineering, especially in the requirements process. This is what we were explaining earlier, the requirements abstraction. Why do we need to have abstraction and detail? So as I said, initially we may just need to provide a plain, you can say proposal, this proposal that does not have too much of details. You can just provide your solutions in the most abstract way in order for you not to put everything together at once. Once you win, if you win the bid, if you get the project, then you can detail everything. And the same goes for the company. The company, when they let a contract, let's say they decide for letting a contract for a software, then they shouldn't provide details of this software in a way that they give a solution or predefined solution. If you are giving predefined solution, you are not opening actually for bidding. You ask people just to accomplish. And in that case, no. You allow people to come up with their ideas and bid based on their own view and planning. Types of requirements. We have different types of requirements based on the view. So we have different views. User requirements. Users, let us consider ourselves as users. Let's put ourselves out of development. Now we are not developers, let's say. And if we look as users, we are all users of software. We use software packages or applications. Then what are we expecting as requirements? Usually we define certain functionality from our own perspective. Do you remember the Mentcare we explained about a few chapters ago? So we explained about one system for mental health care. This system may have such a user requirement definition. Let's just read it. The Mentcare system shall generate monthly management reports showing the cost of drugs prescribed by each clinic during the month. Well, so this is a clear definition for what the user is expecting. We need to have some reports about the cost of the drug prescribed by each clinic. We may have different clinics under the same software for the same management. Well, if we want to elaborate this one from system requirements specification, we have to go too detailed. So the details here reflect the definition from system perspective. So for the system perspective now, let's look at it. Initially, we have to define on which day we need to provide the report. The second thing, we need to provide at what time we need to provide the report. The third thing, we need to provide what kind of report we need to provide. That means, do we need to provide the names of drugs or medications, the number of prescriptions, the doses, etc. Also, well, if we have different doses of the medications used, should we report them? So they need to be reported separately? If yes, then they have to be listed as system requirements. Also, the access to the cost. Who can access? Doctors or managers or anyone, or we should authorize the access to those. So as you can see, just a plain user requirement, simple one, defined easily by few words, 2 lines, may take us to a detailed requirements specification for a system that may take for 5 points or more. So it depends. That's why we may have an abstract view, usually describes what the user wants in plain sentences, to an extremely detailed specification, which represent the real system design, ultimately. Well, let's think about the readers of different types of requirements. And as I said, the difference in definition, or the requirements specification in this case, is the view, the readers. So user requirements usually are read by client managers and system end users, client engineers, contractor managers, system architects. Now, if we go a little bit lower level to the system requirements, who will read them? Who's interested in checking system requirements? You will not find client managers reading system requirements. They are not much interested in that. They are actually managers of some way, not for system development, but you will find end users. For sure you will find them because they contribute to the development process where we need their opinions about the components being developed. Sorry. Client engineers, we need them. Why? Because their contribution also is needed, especially when we cannot actually reach a consensus with the users. We need someone to create a mutual understanding between developers or designers and users. We will not find also contractor managers. They have no business to do with systems. They just manage outside between the client and whoever is managing the company of the software production. System architects should be there. And one more component, or actually stakeholder, or maybe you can say reader, software developers, those who will develop the software, those who will write codes to create the executable file of the software. Let's not extend, move on. System stakeholders. In brief, system stakeholders are actually anyone who's, or any party, not necessarily a person, who's affected or who's influenced or who has legitimate interest in the software being developed. So you may think about end users. Well, they are interested in the software being developed. System managers also, they are interested in the software being developed, the owners of the system. Also external stakeholders. Well, we may have some external supervisors or representatives of certain, you can say, organizations, maybe government. We will explain about this one in future. But imagine that we have a person from an external body or organization that has an interest in our software and legitimate, you can say, stance to come and join. So if we think about a possible example for stakeholders in Mentcare System, Mentcare, we explained about it, as I said earlier, so we will keep on giving examples about it, and also the iLearn system. If we think about those who are influenced by one way or another in the Mentcare System, the patients, well, those are influenced by the system. They need to use it, check their records and so on. Doctors also, they need to access to the patient's records and assess what they are actually taking as a medication and so on. They check their history. Nurses, for consultation, for basic treatment and so on. Medical receptionists, for setting up appointments. And also IT staff, those who are responsible about the management and the installation of the software. You may think about an external, you can say, in this case, stakeholder, maybe medical ethics manager, someone from government to maintain that there is a, you can say, minimum policy of ethics applied somewhere based on a certain ethical guideline. Also the healthcare managers, these are stakeholder of such system. They take a part of such system. We have some staff for archiving, recording and archiving. So we need those for actually clear access to the data when it is needed. Agile methods and requirements. Well, in brief, Agile methods, as you know, we explain about them that they take some sort of incremental development, that we don't need to set requirements in advance, yet we need to just understand from the user or the customer the basic idea of the software, then we come up with an initial, you can say, model, and then we see what we can improve based on the opinion of the user. Therefore, for agile methods in development, the requirements itself is thought as a waste of time. And for this reason, agile methods usually do not consider requirements documents much. Rather, they just go for incremental requirements. We ask users, what do you think about this model? Okay, improve this one, add this one, change that one, then you move on. And that's what we refer to by user stories. We will explain about them at the end of this chapter. But we may face a problem, as I explained in chapter 3, I guess. Yes, chapter 3, the past chapter. We explain about the main problem that faces such a scenario or such a method that we usually need in software industry or projects. We need some deliverable units or stages so that we can measure against them where we are. So we spend this much money. What is this? Where are we in the stage? So are we beyond schedule? Are we ahead of schedule? Are we on time? Do we need to spend more or less? Do we need to cut expenditure and so on? So we can use this kind of maneuver or scenario for maybe business systems are not very big or not very large scale systems. However, if you go for, you can say, complex systems, usually we need pre-delivery analysis and see the feasibility of the project itself. Functional and non-functional requirements. Functional requirements usually reflect what the system is providing as services and how the system actually is reacting to inputs and what kind of behavior the system is providing in particular situations. So these are the functional requirements that we think about the system. Sometimes we include with those the what the system shouldn't do. Not only what the system should do and how it behaves and what kind of reaction it gives. No, we may also add to it what it shouldn't do as a functional requirement. We have also non-functional requirements, and those are actually constraints on the services or the functions offered by the system. So these constraints may thought of as timing constraints, storage constraints, security constraints, and so on. We may also think of them as development process, like what kind of development scenario we are following, what kind of standard, what kind of programming language maybe. So these are also non-functional requirements. The main difference, I have to explain this, I have to give some time to it. Now the main difference is like this. We are, as I said, we are all software users. So think about functional requirement. Functional requirement is like something like this. If I click, what happens? We move to the next slide. Let's say this function is not there. I have to improvise. I have to find another way. Like I have to press this somewhere here, this symbol, to move to backward or forward. Well, it will work for me. I will find my way around usually if one functional requirement is not available. If it is not, major functional requirement, it's just a basic one that we have, we can leverage it some way. However, for non-functional requirements, it's not usually the case. Imagine we have a software where its safety standard fails, and the software is used for, let's say, maybe some sort of extremely critical software, like for aviation. So you speak about something extremely dangerous, or the security of some facility that people may access if the standard itself is not well written and provided. So in that case, non-functional requirements usually affect the whole software, not just one part of the software. Non-functional requirements may affect only one part for each functional piece or requirement. We have another sort of requirements. We call it domain requirements. Actually, those are relevant to what the domain of operation requires. We may combine them to functional requirement or non-functional depending on the type of the domain requirements or the domain of operation. We will take some examples about them later on, not now. For functional requirements, as I said earlier, they describe the functionality of the system or the service. Now, what do they depend on? They depend on the software to be developed, its type, the expected users, who will be using this software, and also the type of the systems or available systems where the software to be used, what kind of maybe operating system or what kind of whatever. So in that case, all these should be clearly defined, and they matter when we describe the functionality of a system. For functional requirements, as I said, they may be or they can be high-level statements or more detailed. High-level statements usually they refer to what the the system should do, and in that case, from the user perspective. But if we go to detailed ones, usually we go to the system itself, the description of the system. For functional requirements, we also need to have like the detailed description, as I said, when we go down to the system level. So we may take the abstract one for the user view, and then we may go down to the system level and detail everything. For Mentcare, now let's just have an example about Mentcare so the idea will be clear to you. Well, these are functional requirements. A user shall be able to search the appointments lists for all clinics. This is a functional requirement. So as a user, I may set this requirement. It's easy. I understand that, well, I need some search, you can say, bar to check all the appointments, all possible appointments for all clinics. If in that case, this kind of requirement can be just explained by the user in brief or in basic sense. We may also have another requirement. The system shall generate each day for each clinic a list of patients who are expected to attend appointments that day. Well, this is usually also a user requirement because we didn't give details about the system. Well, it's also a functional requirement. Each staff member using the system shall be uniquely identified by his or her 8-digit employee number. So this is an identification process. Well, in this case, we are actually required to have some sort of functional requirement to maintain a non-functional requirement. What do I mean by this? Well, authentication by itself is not a functional requirement. However, we need a functional interface to provide this authentication for security purpose. Okay. We may have some requirements imprecision. That means you can say a problem with the precise description of the functional requirements. This kind of ambiguity of the requirements may come due to different interpretation by the user and the developer. What does it mean? Now let's just have a look. Earlier we said user shall be able to search the appointments list for all clinics. Well, as a user, I may think of, I would like to search for patient name across all appointments, all clinics. This is my intention as a user or the customer of the software. The developer's interpretation, maybe the developer will think of it this way. Well, I will search for a patient name in an individual clinic, and then I choose, well, where to search, which clinic I search, not all of them at once. So I can search for all of them, but picking one by one. And this may be a problem. This kind of interpretation may be a problem. This is an imprecision usually available in requirements while developing a software. We have something we usually refer to by completeness. The completeness and the consistency of requirements. The requirements should be complete and consistent. Complete means what? They include all the description needed for the facility to be provided or required by the client or the customer. Consistent, we shouldn't have contradictions. What does it mean? Requirement A shouldn't contradict requirement B, and so on. That means we may have we may not have or we may not accept conflicting or contradicting requirements. But practically this is almost impossible, considering like software by itself is a big project usually, and we may have different tasks and different requirements based on different uses or different expectations. So we may compromise between completeness and consistency, depending on what the user's priority. Non-functional requirements. So we said earlier, non-functional requirements are not related to the services. However, they are constraints on these services provided by the system or the operational process of the system. You may think about the reliability of the system, how reliable my system is, what kind of faults do we have in it, what kind of failures do we have, long failure time, or what kind of, you can say, downtime of the system, response time, storage requirements, security requirements, and so on. We may also have constraints on the input and output capabilities. So what kind of constraints for in and out to the software from external devices or from the input and output of the PC itself. We may also think about system representation. These are all non-functional requirements. Think about also another, you can say, orientation of system requirements. How about if we request the company to develop the software using certain integrated development environment, IDE, or maybe using certain programming paradigm or language? That's also a non-functional requirement. We may think of non-functional requirement as actually a very critical, you can say, component for requirements or requirements type, as they affect the whole system. We may make one mistake in non-functional requirement and all our system will be useless in that case, and that's not a mistake a software developer should do. So for the non-functional requirements implementation, we may need to empathize with different factors. What does it mean? Well, we need to clearly understand the architecture of the software in order for us to leverage non-functional requirements. For example, if we are speaking about performance requirements, we need to limit or minimize communication or interfacing so that we don't get stuck with, you can say, delay somewhere or processing time somewhere, or maybe a storage limitation somewhere. As I said earlier, only one non-functional requirement may make your software fail. Think about security we mentioned earlier, or safety also. These may make the whole software project as a complete failure if not clearly defined and checked. Also, we may restrict the functional requirements by some non-functional requirements that's possible due to some restrictions. So if you want to do this, you have to give up this and this. That's possible. Look at the types of non-functional requirements. We have three main categories: product requirements, organization requirements, and external requirements. These can be represented by, you can say, the specification for the product requirements, usually the specification of the behavior of the system, maybe the execution time or speed, the reliability, and so on. These can be related to the product. Maybe security also requirements, usability requirements. As I said earlier, like efficiency, performance. If we think about the space requirements or the running time, and you will study those later on in data structures. So time and space complexity, later on you will study them. For organizational requirements, we may think about the environment used for development or the way the software will operate. And I mentioned about the development and the environment that the software will run on or will be installed on. These are also non-functional requirements, but they affect the functional requirements of the software. We may have also external requirements. These are usually affecting the system externally. What does it mean? Well, think about the ethics. We mentioned about it earlier. Think about the rules and regulations. Those we need to maintain while designing and implementing and developing a software. I'm sorry. Think about legislative. Think about things related to law, whether our software is maintaining certain, you can say, safety and security measures or not. So these are external requirements that we consider as non-functional requirements. These are examples of non-functional requirements for Mentcare. So we are going practical now. I mean, these are practically provided as non-functional requirements. So product requirements: the Mentcare system shall be available to all clinics during normal working hours, from Monday to Friday, from 8:30 a.m. to 5:30 p.m. Now, this is a non-functional requirement. However, it dictates the operational process of a system. So this is a product requirement, how my product is behaving or producing its output. Downtime. So we speak about the earlier we said, like the efficiency, for example, here, the reliability, efficiency of the software. The reliability of the software. Downtime with normal working hours shall not exceed 5 seconds. So we can just tolerate 5 seconds per day. Well, you think about the reliability of the software, faults and failures. Organizational requirement: users of the Mentcare system shall authenticate themselves using their health authority identity card. Well, now we think about the organizational requirement, how our organization is looking for the operation of the software. So in that case, we think about how we can run the software using some sort of authorization. External requirement of Mentcare: the system shall implement patient privacy provisions as set out in some certain provision. Well, we have so many provisions, we can stick to one of them, or it may be required by maybe certain, you can say, organizations or government organization as a policy for software. It varies from one country to another, or from one continent to another. But still, it's an external requirement, should be maintained so that your software will be legally used and ethically will be safe and sound. Well, this is the end of our session. I hope you guys are enjoyed, and sorry it is a bit long than expected, but I hope you guys will benefit from it, and I hope I will see you in very soon sessions. Goodbye.